Navigating our complex cities by foot with their complicated intersections, fast-moving vehicles, lighted signals, unwritten rules, dodging runners, joggers, people on bikes, and on their phones is all hard enough, but add to that a vision impairment and the city can easily become an impossible and dangerous place to move about. You'd be forgiven if you thought these little bumps poking up from most curb cuts were built for traction. In many places, they have just started popping up in the past decade, and if not embedded directly into the pavement, they are added in the form of these yellow square mats. While they are not there to keep you from slipping, they do serve an important role in making our streets safer for people. The idea of what became known as the Tactile Paver was conceived in 1965 in Japan by a hotel owner named Seiichi Miyake. Seiichi had a visually impaired friend and wanted to help him better navigate the increasingly dangerous urban environment. In 1967, he funded the installation of the first tactile pavers in his hometown of Okayama City, near the Okayama School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. These are perhaps the oldest tactile pavers in the world. From here, the idea spread to many different types of transportation infrastructure. In 1977, they were used for most public transportation, and in 1985, they became a legal requirement for most public spaces in Japan. Tactile pavers convey a lot more information than you might realize. First, there are two types of pavers. The first, and perhaps the more familiar, are the ones with the little round bumps you see at intersections. These tactile pavers, called truncated domes, are there to help warn the visually impaired about the traffic that lies beyond the pavers or the drop-off of the rail platform ahead. The other type of tactile paver consists of grooves that are directional markers, helping the visually impaired stay on a particular path. Both types of pavers are able to convey their message via cane or when stepped on. The pavers are traditionally bright yellow, creating a strong visual contrast against the gray pavement to help those that may not require a cane but benefit from the brightly colored navigation aids. The yellow color was part of the original Miyake design, but that isn't always how pavers end up. Such is the case here in a common suburban neighborhood where the developers adopted the tactile design but chose to place them in more muted colors to make them less conspicuous in a place where neighbors prize everything is fitting in and nothing that stands out too much. This is also a growing issue in bigger cities like London.
All around Britain you will find this, tactile paving. It's to help blind and partially sighted people find their way around. And here's the clever part, and the part that almost everyone who is fully sighted will never have noticed. There are different patterns for different situations.
Very few people see nothing at all, that's important to say. Only about 3%. Some people have light perception, some people have a bit more vision, some people have a limited field of vision, some people have poor central vision but good peripheral vision. Essentially think of partially sighted people with enough vision to be able to get around safely and independently, blind being below that threshold.
Dots in a grid like this mean a dropped curb for crossing the road. If it's red, or at least it's supposed to be red, then it's a crossing with lights or something else to stop traffic. These designs are for partially sighted people too, so bright contrasting colours are a good idea. There is a small amount of tactile paving here, uses a marker to flag up where the crossing is. And then, nearer the road, it's for the full length of the crossing, so you can work out where it is. And it's important to balance marking the crossing against not using too much tactile paving, because someone with arthritis can find surfaces like this painful to cross.
Navigating around in an unfamiliar area is always a bit scary, to be honest, because obviously the traditional visual clues, landmarks, etc. aren't there. It helps a lot if clues are consistent, so confusion can certainly occur when that isn't the case. It's very, very important that these adaptations that are there to help us are actually there to help us and are actually there in the way that we expect to see them.
But there are other patterns too. Offset dots mean there's a train platform ahead, a big chasm you could fall into. Lozenge shapes mean a tram platform, something close to street level that could run you over. Stripes across the path mean there's some steps ahead or a couple of other things that could trip you up. Stripes along the path mean a safe route to follow. And if there's a path that's half for foot traffic and half for bicycles, well, the direction of the stripes tells you which side is which.
Boroughs in London, councils outside of London seem to be moving more towards aesthetic considerations, i.e. they're changing the colour to darker grey so it blends in more. By definition, if it blends in more, it's harder for partially sighted people such as myself to actually see, or obviously in a more dire situation, people can find themselves in the road not knowing they're in the road simply because those essential clues aren't there.
And sure, all this is tricky to get right. The design standards for how this is laid down are literally 100 pages long. But so are the design standards for everything about public infrastructure. Having reliable rules that everyone understands is important when there are tons of metal speeding past you.
Tactile pavers, like curb cuts, are a small idea with massive benefits to those that are often marginalized in society. In the scheme of things, and in terms of overall infrastructure budgets, tactile pavers and curb cuts cost very little to develop, but offer mobility and visually impaired people a chance to enjoy the autonomy and safety that many others take for granted. These are two important elements of the built environment and are also part of a larger movement called universal design.
In 1997, a team of architects, designers, and researchers at North Carolina State University created a list of principles that would be used to define universal design. Today, we're visiting Berkeley, California's universally designed Ed Roberts campus to explain what the researchers called the 7 principles of universal design. This is Power On. Principle 1. Equitable use. A building that is universally designed is a building that's designed for people with all kinds of abilities. That's a general idea of a universally designed building. Now, for a lot of people that live in cities, the only way to get around is via public transportation. So we're going to jump on BART, which is the public transportation system around the San Francisco Bay Area, and see where it takes us. So we've made it to the Ashby station, and connected to the station is the building that houses the Ed Roberts campus. All we do is go in this elevator, we go up 1 story, and it opens right into the lobby. This is Ed Roberts campus, an 85,000 square foot building that houses disability-focused organizations. Named after disability rights pioneer and former executive director at the CIL, Ed Roberts campus has won numerous awards for its accessible design. Designers often tack on a ramp as an afterthought, but the team at LMS Architecture started with accessibility and turned the ramp into the building's centerpiece. On the wall behind the ramp, a gallery of photos show Berkeley's deep history in the disability rights movement. The second principle of universal design is flexibility in use, meaning that a building can be configured in various ways to accommodate a person's needs. In some of the offices, you might find adjustable desks, which can be used at any height depending on each person's preference. Principle 3, simple and intuitive use. This means that the design is easy to understand for everybody. So as soon as you walk in the door, it makes sense where to go, whether to the front desk or elsewhere, via practical, easy to understand signage. If you've ever used an IKEA instruction manual, it's a bit of an exercise in universal design. Very easy to follow, yet not a single written word. And speaking of signage, the fourth principle is perceptible information. This means that the design can communicate all of its necessary information to everybody. An example of that are the signs here at the Ed Roberts campus. All the signs throughout the campus are both in written word as well as Braille. The fountain at the end of the building isn't just for decoration. It also provides a reference point for people with low vision when getting around the building. Principle 5 is tolerance for error. This principle refers to safety, stressing the importance that the design minimizes hazards, accidents, or unintended actions. In the event of an emergency, the ramp provides a safe exit if the elevators aren't in use. Principle 6, low physical effort. This says that the design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with minimum fatigue. A building that is universally designed shouldn't be exhausting to get around or to use. In architecture, that comes in the form of automatic doors, elevators, and mostly flat surfaces. Principle 7, size and space for approach and use. This principle says that the building shouldn't restrict anyone by its size or space. So that of course means wide doorways and adequate space for wheelchairs to navigate, but it's also important that nothing is out of reach for people who need access to something. When we came up the elevators, there were buttons where you would normally find them, but also buttons along the floor if that's more accessible, and you can find this feature all throughout the building.